So through the master's program, I worked on Gistory, which was a startup whose aim was to give you complete, concise, and contextualized news on a world map. And with the help of a very, very amazing, a very talented team of students from the university, we were able to launch Gistory. And over the course of time, we worked on Gistory for a year and a half. And it picked up really quickly. We grew. Unfortunately, in January 2016, I had to make the tough decision to put a pause on my work with Gistory, because so much of my time went on raising capital. I wasn't able to concentrate much on the content innovation part of it. And also, I had other job offers, which I decided to focus my attention on. But I want to start with Gistory because I think that has really taught me about distribution and content consumption. And that has really guided my work with RYOT, the job that I did after Huffington Post and now Al Jazeera. Before founding Gistory, I was interning for an award-winning documentary news show. And one of my frustrations with the show was that the content was amazing. We spent weeks working on investigations and thousands of dollars on the story. But when the video was out on YouTube, the 25-minute video, there weren't a lot of people that were watching it. And one of the reasons was that we only did the documentary for one platform. It was only meant to be put out on TV and YouTube. We didn't think about how audiences are going to consume the documentary on different social platforms. And so when I decided to work on Gistory, one of my main inspirations and goals behind it was to create content to tailor it for different social platforms and to use the strengths of different platforms to actually do content where the users are right now. And so some of the examples of the stuff that we did with Gistory were graphics for Facebook. As you can see, we had a really distinct voice for Gistory. Our target audience was millennials. And so our social posts were catchy, sassy, conversational, and it was extremely visual. We had a very strong identity. We did different content for Facebook, for Twitter, for Instagram, and for YouTube. So we thought about what are the different kinds of users on these platforms, and we did content specifically for those platforms, specifically for millennials. And I learned 3 important lessons by working on Gistory. The first one is social media is a vital tool for news discovery and consumption. The second one is repackaging does not work. And the third important lesson was that content is core. So to expound more on the first one, social media is a vital tool for news discovery and consumption. A majority of Americans get their news from social media and direct visits to news websites. More than half of Americans use social media to connect with one another and engage with their news content. Especially young adults between the age of 18 to 29 are using social media to get their news. And so I think it's an undisputed fact that if you want to reach the right audiences, you have to be on these different platforms. One of the things I hear very often in the newsroom is that if we're going to do content for social media, we are diluting our journalism. We are losing control over doing quality journalism. And that's something I've struggled with because I don't think by being on social media, you're taking away from the story, because there are different ways to do storytelling on different platforms. And I think social media needs to be seen as a way to reach more audiences, getting a larger audience along with the one that already exists on your website or the different channels. The second lesson, repackaging does not work. Your content should be tailored to fit each social media platform. The visual vocabulary is extremely important in today's age, in the digital media age. Everything is about it's about the visual, it's about the identity you've created, it's about the brand, it's the trust you have developed with your audience. And this is an example of a documentary, a virtual reality documentary that I did last year called Inside Trump's America. Last year I was with RYOT, and RYOT is a company that focuses on virtual reality storytelling. I was working as a managing editor, figuring out the content strategy, their editorial, and when we went out to do this documentary, the first thing we did is that we decided, how are we going to tell this story on the different platforms, not just the main 5-minute VR documentary that lives on Facebook and YouTube. So the first thing that we did is when we went there, we actually did a Facebook live stream. So the purpose of the Facebook live stream is to take questions from the audience, to see what they're interested in talking about, what are the questions they wanted answered from this rally that was happening in Wisconsin where Donald Trump was supposed to be speaking. So that gives you a sense of what your audience is interested in, what are the conversations they want to have. Along with the Facebook live stream, while we were out on the field, we also posted videos on Instagram in real time. We posted images on Instagram. We did a Snapchat story. I was producing the documentary, and also I was a correspondent for it. So that was a lot of work, and that's why I think before going out in the field, now with having so many different platforms of distribution, it becomes an even harder task for journalists and producers to put together an effective and engaging story. And so we had planned all of this before, that we wanted stuff to go out on Instagram, we wanted something to be on Snapchat, we wanted to have a presence on YouTube and Facebook. While the story was being edited, we did a trailer. We put out a trailer for the video on Facebook because we wanted our audiences, since they'd watched the stories on, since they'd watched the Facebook live stream or seen the images and videos on Instagram, we felt like we had created a connection with them about the story, and we wanted to keep them updated about the video that we had worked on in the field. And so we did a 2-minute trailer for the video, put it out on Facebook, and then before the video was launched, we did quote graphics on Instagram. We did statistic graphics on Twitter. And that way we are keeping that connection with our audience, telling them the story is about to come, giving them a taste, a preview of what they are going to expect to see. And then finally, we launched the 5.5-minute documentary, Inside Trump's America. This was probably one of the most widely watched documentaries that RYOT produced. And one of the reasons we felt that it was so effective is because we continued the conversation from the time the correspondent was out in the field to when the final product was released. So the way as a producer, the way I like to think about content is that my story starts when I'm out in the field on Facebook Live or Snapchat. It continues on Instagram and Facebook, and it completes its journey with the main video on the website or another platform or device. And the video should be able to stand alone, but when it is seen with its different components put out on different distribution sites, you should be able to tell a more immersive and engaging story. And the third lesson, and this is probably the most important lesson from all of the three, is that the content is the core. Your impact of the content on different social platforms is only as good as the main story itself. And I think this, just because you're putting stuff out on social, doesn't mean that your journalism or your investigation needs to suffer. It just means that now you've gotten different platforms to think about, to tell stories differently. About 2 in 3 Americans, 64% of Americans, say that fabricated news stories cause a great deal of confusion about the basic facts of current issues and events. And specifically now, in this time of fake news, it has become more important for us as journalists to concentrate on the work that we are doing, the content that we're putting out. Just because we have an audience that needs to consume content doesn't mean we put out substandard journalism. or content. Social platforms have become so crowded that only quality content stands out. And in order to tell a great story, you need to tell it in the right way for the right platform. And one of my favorite example of this is Reveal, the Center for Investigative Reporting, does some really good storytelling on Instagram. And they recently did a story about the unjust imprisonment of Rodney Roberts and the troubling aspects of the US criminal justice system. They used 21 illustrations, one for each year, beginning when Roberts was convicted in 1996, to tell the story of his imprisonment. This story was told entirely on Instagram, and it was an investigative piece accompanied with illustrations that lived on Instagram. Reveal saw a 50% increase in its audience growth because of this story. So to sum it all up, journalism is essential, now more than ever. We need to focus on the storytelling. You need to tell a great story and tell it in the right way for the right platform. And the last lesson is you need to cross-promote. We're putting out something on Instagram, you need to cross-promote it on Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube, whatever different social platforms that are out there. You need to double down on distribution. In that way, you will be able to redirect your audiences from different social platforms and direct them back to your website.
Questions? So this is interesting. Oh, we've got one?
No.
So I thought it was really fascinating the way you kind of talking about distributing like semi-equally across platforms, but did you find as you produced certain pieces they worked better on certain platforms and would then try to drive them there, or were you still seeing like we have to get them back to the website?
So I wouldn't say that we concentrate on every platform equally. I think it depends on the audience of the media organization. So when I was working at RYOT, we had a really strong presence on Instagram. But when RYOT was acquired by the Huffington Post, we realized that the audience of the Huffington Post was very different. The platforms that they were on were very different than the platforms that the RYOT audience was. So you need to see where your audiences actually live, what sort of content they consume, and then you tailor your production based on those platforms. Currently, I am working a lot on virtual reality stuff, and so I think distribution for that is a little different compared to a text story which you're distributing or a documentary, because it's hard to convey to your audience that the final product is going to be in virtual reality. But you still need to create that engagement while you're out in the field. And so you do it through 360 stills. You do it through your social posts. But the engagement still needs to be there on the social platforms in linear, even though your final product will be VR or 360.
Other questions? Yeah.
It's fascinating. When you talk about VR, that was actually something that was, when you just mentioned it, as something I wanted to ask. Do you see, we see a lot of folks trying to create and promote content now around VR. Is there an ideal length or format or something like that? You can talk a little bit about VR versus, say, the shorter documentaries or whatever that you may have done as well.
Again, it actually depends where your video is living. If it's primarily for Facebook or YouTube 360, again, it depends. If it's a social video, then the length should be less than 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be if it's a documentary. We've seen, again, I go back to saying the content is the center of consumption. If your content is good, people will watch it. This documentary that I spoke about, Inside Trump's America, is 5.5 minutes, which is much longer than an average video length on Facebook. But typically, we do see social videos that are less than 2 minutes on Facebook that do better than our longer content. And then for headsets, I think in headsets, typically, content that is longer is preferred, because when you're putting on the headset, you've made a decision that you want to watch something, so you've already committed to it, and people want to watch and be engaged with the story for a longer time. Yeah.
Sorry. Really quick, there was something that you said that I was hoping you might be able to talk about, where you said the way that you think about your reporting, even with social platforms in mind, is it starts with like Facebook Live, or isn't it a full-on process? Can you just repeat that, just in terms of how you?
Sure. So, I give out a sheet to all of my producers, or when I use it when I go out in the field. These are the platforms that we're targeting. So we start with Facebook Live, because I think that is actually a good way to understand what your audience wants to hear, how they're interacting with you, what aspect of the story that they're interested in, so you can incorporate that into the production of the video or the documentary that you're doing. When we're out in the field, I ask my producers to send me images or to post the images on Instagram in real time, so that people can see where our correspondents are, where our producers are, be engaged with them, create a relationship with them. We try to put out a video on Instagram in real time. Sometimes we post it after the production's done. Again, Snapchat. We don't do as much Snapchat as we would like to. It's something that we're trying to focus more on. But Snapchat is, again, a really good way to keep your audiences engaged, what you're currently doing in the field. And the best Snapchat content that we've seen for us while we're doing VR documentary that works is talking about what the correspondent is doing at the time that they're doing it. So sort of taking your viewer through your journey. And then, of course, before the video premieres, we do stuff on Instagram, quote graphics, statistic graphics, illustrations, whatever works best. And then we also try to do something post the launch. Once a video has come out, we promote the video on different social channels.
Thank you for this. I have a question about the VR distribution, and sort of if you have ideas on the directions you see it going. There are Sony released numbers in terms of VR headsets that they've been selling, and that looks interesting. And Google's making a big push with Daydream. What have you seen from the data that you do have about what works, and particularly what works for storytelling and journalism versus VR in gaming?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. I think one of the things that I find fascinating and also really challenging is that the VR industry is dominated by gaming and advertising. So there isn't very much in terms of storytelling, especially news, to take inspiration from. And I think that's something that will be developed over the course of time. Again, VR, I think right now what we're seeing in the news industry is mostly 360 video. And those are the more basic news videos, the stuff that the New York Times does, The Guardian does. They are not meant to live in the headset. They are being produced on lower quality cameras for your social platforms. So I think the consumption of that is very different to the stuff that is specifically created for the headset. And I think we don't have enough data to be able to talk about how the storytelling differs in the headset versus what's preferred on YouTube or Facebook. But I think this is an area that will be developing over time. And I think tech companies are very optimistic about VR and keep pushing it. They're pushing their headsets. But I again think that VR in the headset is a very elitist medium. So the audiences are limited right now to people in the United States. We have a much larger audience when it comes to 360 video.
And we're very fortunate to have Archie Thornton in the back of the room, Sarah Springer from RYOT, who also does quite a bit in augmented reality. So we're going to have a lot of discussions about augmented reality. And then Sarah Hill will be here tomorrow, also someone who's working in that space a lot. So we're going to have a lot of conversations about AR, VR as we go through this conference. Zahra Rasool, thank you so much for being here.